The shrill sound of alarms echoed through the steel corridors of the Operation Clean Sweep Command Center. Red lights flashed in rhythmic pulses, casting shadows that flickered like ghosts across the cold metallic walls. The air buzzed with urgency as officers and technicians scrambled between holographic displays. At the heart of the chaos, Kade, Jansen, and Dr. Martel stood in the briefing chamber. The room was a stark contrast to the frenzy outside. Sterile and eerily quiet, save for the droning voice of Colonel Armitage, their mission commander. His scarred face, illuminated by the pale glow of a holographic map, betrayed no emotion. Gaian Harmony forces breached the perimeter 20 minutes ago, Armitage began, gesturing to a series of red markers blinking on the map. Their targets are clear: the orbital launch catapult and the solar array. Both are critical to our operations. If we lose either, it's a death sentence for orbital resupply and energy distribution. Kade crossed his arms. His expression was calm, but his eyes flicked between the markers on the map, calculating angles, distances, and possible choke points. "And us?" he asked, his voice steady, low. Armitage's lips tightened. "Your primary objective is to monitor for Whistler interference. There's no sign of them yet, but we know how they thrive in chaos. If they appear, your orders are to engage immediately." Martel shifted uncomfortably, the tension evident in her pale knuckles gripping the edge of the table. "This zone is crawling with heavy combat units. Are we seriously expecting Whistlers to show up in the middle of this?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt and tinged with dread. Armitage leveled her with a stare. "We've learned the hard way to expect them anywhere." Martel nodded reluctantly, her eyes darting to the screen where environmental data flickered. A cacophony of heat signatures, electromagnetic surges, and movement trackers. Her role was clear: stay in the mobile command unit and monitor the biological sensors for any sign of Whistler activity. Jansen, leaning casually against the wall, smirked. "So we're babysitting. Easy enough." Armitage's voice hardened. "This is a heavy combat zone, Sergeant. Don't let your guard down. The Gaians are deploying smaller mechs, heavy drones, and teams with anti-armor weaponry. It's not a stroll through the slums." Jansen's grin faded as Kade gave him a sharp look. "We're not here to underestimate anyone," the squad leader reminded him. "Focus." Armitage continued, "There's another variable. You'll rendezvous with an allied mech pilot, Jill Carter, call sign Apollo 3. She's young but seasoned, and her unit will be operating in the debris zone north of the solar array. Mechs are our best option for navigating that terrain." A flicker of concern crossed Kade's face. "What's her status?" "She's effective," Armitage replied curtly, "but she's not invincible. Your job is to ensure no one gets caught off guard. Any further questions?" The room fell silent, the weight of the mission settling like a shroud. Outside, the alarms continued their relentless cry. In the armory, Kade and Jansen suited up in their power armor. Kade's armor, matte black with streaks of dull silver, was a testament to years of service, scarred but reliable. Jansen's, sleek and imposing, was built for heavy firepower, gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Martel lingered nearby, securing her headset and checking her data interface. Her exoskeleton, though absent for this mission, had left faint bruises along her arms from recent training. She rubbed them absently, her mind clearly elsewhere. "You good, Doc?" Jansen asked, his tones softer than usual. Martel nodded, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. "Just be careful out there," she said quietly. Kade placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've got this. Just keep us in the loop." As the squad stepped into the deployment bay, the blast doors groaned open, revealing the war-torn landscape of the Spine. The city stretched out before them, a crumbling labyrinth of jagged steel and shattered concrete. In the distance, the solar array shimmered like a mirage, its sleek panels stark against the backdrop of destruction. Jansen hefted his rifle. "Let's roll." Kade's voice cut through the comms, calm and commanding. "Be alert. We're walking into a powder keg." And with that, they moved out, shadows among the ruins, tension crackling in the air like a storm waiting to break. The drop was rough. The transport's descent kicked up a storm of ash and debris as it set down on the outskirts of the Spire. The ruined city stretched out before Kade and Jansen, a vast wasteland of collapsed buildings, jagged steel spires, and yawning chasms. The terrain was treacherous, littered with the detritus of decades-long conflict. Smoke curled lazily into the sky from distant fires, and the sporadic crackle of gunfire echoed through the ruins. Enemy forces emerged from the rubble, their shouts drowned out by the roar of gunfire. Small mechs, their frames crude and hastily assembled, stomped forward, engaging Jill's Apollo in a chaotic firefight. The Apollo's 30mm rifle barked again, punching holes through the enemy machines. A salvo of missiles erupted from the mech's pods, streaking across the battlefield and detonating in fiery explosions that lit up the ruins. Kade and Jansen moved with precision through the chaos, flanking enemy positions and cutting down Gaian soldiers. Jansen's heavy weaponry thundered, shredding through cover and forcing the enemy to retreat. Kade's tactical maneuvers kept the pair out of danger, anticipating flanking attempts and neutralizing threats before they could materialize. "Jill, on your left," Kade said over the comms. Jill's mech pivoted smoothly, her rifle spewing tracer rounds that carved through an enemy mech attempting to flank her. The smaller machine crumpled under the assault, collapsing into a heap of smoking metal. "Nice catch," Jill replied, her voice steady. As the firefight raged, Kade's HUD flagged an anomaly. A collapsed building ahead showed unusual heat signatures. He zoomed in, his visor highlighting Gaian soldiers crouched with anti-armor launchers. They were lying in wait, ready to ambush Jill's mech as she moved past. "We've got a problem," Kade muttered. "Anti-armor team, 3 o'clock. They're waiting for..." Jansen grunted. "Guess we're up." The duo moved swiftly, splitting up to flank the ambushers. Kade scaled a pile of rubble, his power armor's servos straining as he hauled himself into position. Below, Jansen stormed forward, his heavy weapon barrels spinning as he laid down suppressive fire. The Gaian soldiers scrambled for cover, their ambush unraveling. One of the soldiers fired a rocket, the projectile streaking toward Jill's mech. She reacted instantly, sidestepping the blast with practiced ease. The missile exploded harmlessly against a pile of rubble. "That was close," Jill said, her mech's rifle swiveling to return fire. The Gaian team was obliterated in a hail of high-caliber rounds. Kade dropped down from his perch, dispatching the remaining soldiers with precision shots. Jansen moved to cover him, his weapon roaring as he cleared the area. "All clear," Kade reported, his breathing heavy. "Jill, you're good to move?" "Appreciate it," Jill replied, her mech stepping over the wreckage. "You two aren't half bad." But there was no time for celebration. The sound of more engines echoed through the ruins, signaling reinforcements. The battlefield roared with commotion as Jill's Apollo squared off against 2 enemy mechs. The first was a sleek insect-like scout, its rapid-fire cannons peppering her with bursts of suppressive fire. The second was a towering brawler, its reinforced frame bristling with melee weapons and crude oversized armor. Each step it took shook the ground beneath it, an ominous prelude to the battle ahead. Jill's voice crackled through the comms, her tone razor-sharp. "Kade, Jansen, keep the grunts off me. I've got these tin cans." The scout mech darted to her left, its movements quick. Jill rotated the Apollo, but the bulky machine struggled to track the smaller target. The scout weaved through rubble, firing bursts that struck her shoulder-mounted missile pods. Sparks flew as the Apollo's armor absorbed the impacts, but Jill knew she couldn't let it keep its advantage. "Drones on that scout," she commanded. Her escort drones sprang to life, swarming toward the scout mech. They flitted around the enemy, disrupting its targeting systems with precision shots. The scout's movements became erratic, forced into defensive maneuvers. Jill capitalized on the opening, firing a high-explosive round that clipped the mech's side, sending it skittering behind cover. Meanwhile, the brawler mech advanced methodically, its heavy frame crushing debris underfoot, It raised one massive claw-like arm, and Jill braced herself. The Apollo's missile pod swiveled toward the threat, but a burst of fire from the scout mech forced her to divert her aim. "Jansen, take the legs on the scout," Jill shouted. Jansen's heavy weapon roared to life. Positioned on higher ground, he lined up his shot and fired high-explosive rounds. The shell tore through the scout mech's right leg, sending it sprawling. The machine writhed as its system struggled to compensate. "Nice shot," Kade's voice came over the comms. "I'll keep the infantry busy." Kade moved swiftly through the rubble, his power armor a blur of motion as he dispatched Gaian soldiers attempting to flank Jill. He fired his rifle in controlled bursts, cutting down enemies before they could take up positions. With the scout mech disabled, Jill turned her focus to the brawler. It charged forward, its clawed arms outstretched. The Apollo's 30mm rifle spat a flurry of rounds, each one slamming into the brawler's chestplate. The enemy mech staggered, but didn't slow, its sheer mass and armor soaking the damage. The impact came like a freight train. The brawler slammed into the Apollo, its claw digging into Jill's mech's side. Alarms blared in her cockpit as the two machines grappled, metal grinding against metal. Jill grit her teeth, her hands flying over the controls as she fought to free her mech. "You're not getting me that easy," she growled. The brawler raised its other arm, preparing to bring it down on the Apollo's cockpit. Jill fired her missile pods at point-blank range. The explosion rocked both mechs, sending the brawler stumbling backward. Its armor, though thick, showed massive scorch marks and exposed wiring. "Jansen, Kade, I could use a hand here," Jill yelled. Kade turned his attention to the brawler, laying down suppressive fire to keep Gaian infantry at bay. "On it!" "Jansen, flank that thing." Jansen moved to the brawler's side, his weapon trained on its exposed joints. He fired a precision round that shattered the servo in its left leg, forcing the mech to one knee. Jill seized the moment, wrenching the Apollo free and slamming her rifle stock into the brawler's damaged knee joint. The massive enemy mech toppled, crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and sparks. Jill didn't hesitate. She leveled the Apollo's missile pods and unleashed a final salvo. The missiles struck the brawler's cockpit, reducing it to a smoldering wreck. The battlefield fell eerily silent as the last of the enemy forces retreated, their remaining mechs dragging themselves back through the ruins. Jill slumped back in her cockpit seat, her breath ragged. Her Apollo mech was battered and scorched, its once formidable armor marred by gashes and burn marks. Kade and Jansen regrouped with her, their power armor similarly scarred from the fight. Kade glanced at the wreckage around them, his rifle still at the ready. "We secure?" "For now," Jill replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But they'll be back." Jansen walked up to the Apollo's battered leg, tapping it with a gauntleted fist. "This thing has some real firepower." As the team surveyed the carnage, a faint mechanical whine echoed through the ruins. Jill's drones buzzed around them, scanning for any remaining threats. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burnt circuitry. "Let's not stick around to see if they regroup," Kade said. "We need to check in with Martel." Jill ordered her drones to return to their docks. The trio moved out, leaving the smoldering battlefield behind. It was quieter now, the echoes of gunfire and clashing metal replaced by the hum of operational drones and the distant crackle of flames from wrecked enemy mechs. The air hung heavy with the stench of scorched metal and ozone, a reminder of the brutal combat that had just unfolded. Kade, Jansen, and Jill stood amidst the rubble, their war-torn figures framed by the skeletal remains of the Spire's outer ruins. Martel's voice crackled through their comms. "Whistler activity still reads as 0, but I'm not liking the energy readings from that solar array. There's residual interference. Gaian tech might have planted something." "Noted," Kade replied, his tone clipped as he scanned the horizon through his helmet's enhanced optics. "Jansen, check the perimeter. Jill, can your drones confirm there's no sabotage we missed?" Jill, still in her battered Apollo mech, activated her remaining drones. They buzzed out in formation, scanning the solar array and its surrounding infrastructure. She watched the feeds on her cockpit display, her eyes narrowing at every flicker of potential movement. "Nothing major yet," she said, "but they left some debris that could be traps. Might need a sweep team to clean this up." Moments later, the engineers arrived, convoying in armored vehicles. They set to work under the watchful gaze of Kade and Jansen, repairing the solar array and stabilizing the catapult systems. Every clang of their tools seemed unnaturally loud in the aftermath of the battle. "They're exposed," Jansen muttered, his weapon still at the ready. "If the Gaians have reinforcements waiting." "They won't," Kade interrupted. "Not after the beating they just took. But we're not leaving until we're sure." Jill powered down the Apollo and climbed out, her limbs stiff as she removed her helmet. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead, and her expression was one of exhaustion. The mech loomed behind her like a silent sentinel. Kade approached her, his power armor clinking softly with each step. "Good work out there," he said, his voice low but steady. "Your piloting made the difference." Jill gave a tired smile, sitting on a piece of rubble. "Difference or not, it's the same fight every time. They hit, we hit back. Just another cycle of destruction." "Welcome to the Spire," Kade replied, lowering himself to sit beside her. "Survivors don't get to stop fighting." Jill glanced at him, her expression softening. "You don't strike me as the motivational type." "I'm not," Kade said bluntly. "But I know how to keep people moving. Sometimes that's all we've got." In the mobile command unit, Martel's brow furrowed as she analyzed the battlefield data. Her findings confirmed what she'd feared. Traces of luster had been found on the bodies of the Gaian soldiers. The drug's eerie bioluminescent signature glowed faintly in their veins, even in death. Martel's voice cut into the squad's comms. "Kade, we need to talk about luster. If the Gaians are using Whistler-derived substances, we could be looking at a deeper connection between them and those creatures. This wasn't just a terrorist attack. There's more to it." Jansen's voice broke in. "So what, they're teaming up with the bugs now?" "We can't rule it out," Martel replied, her tone grim. "And if they are, we're in more trouble than we thought." Kade stood, his gaze locked on the ruins. "We'll deal with it. For now, let's get this site secure. Jansen, check in with the engineers. Jill, see if your drones can do one more sweep." Jill nodded, slipping her helmet back on and heading for her mech. Jansen moved toward the engineers, his heavy weapon still at the ready. As the team began their final preparations to leave, the weight of the mission settled on them. The Gaians' retreat felt temporary, and the unease about their connection to the Whistlers lingered like a dark cloud. He marked the area on his map for future patrols, knowing they'd likely be back before long. The team regrouped at the extraction point, leaving the ruins behind, but the questions and dangers they uncovered followed them every step of the way. The extraction point was near a half-destroyed overpass overlooking the Spire. The sun hung low, its rays casting long shadows over the city. The team stood in tense silence as engineers packed up their tools, the faint hum of drone activity buzzing in the distance. Kade's voice cut through the static of the comms. "Jansen, give me a final sweep report." "All clear, boss," Jansen replied, his heavy weapon resting across his chest. "No movement on sensors. Gaians are gone." Martel chimed in from the command unit. "Same here. No signs of Whistler activity either, but those luster readings still bother me." Kade nodded. A deep rumble rolled through the earth beneath them. Dust and debris rattled loose from nearby structures. Jill, back in her Apollo mech, snapped her rifle into position, scanning the area. "Earthquake?" she asked, her voice tense. "Not likely," Martel said sharply. "The catapult isn't active yet, and seismic sensors didn't pick up anything." The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly, with a deafening crash, a section of the ground near the engineers collapsed. Chunks of asphalt and reinforced concrete tumbled into the void, leaving behind a jagged hole that exhaled a blast of cool, stale air. Kade was the first to move, signaling the team to hold their positions. He approached the edge of the newly formed crater cautiously, his rifle at the ready. A deep, dark tunnel stretched downward into the earth, its walls rough but precise. Freshly dug. "Martel, I need eyes on this," Kade said. A drone, sleek and silent, zipped over the hole and descended into the darkness. Its floodlights illuminated the tunnel, revealing claw marks along the walls. The footage streamed back to Martel's monitor, her face growing pale as she processed what she was seeing. Martel's voice trembled as she spoke. "Those claw marks. This tunnel wasn't made by humans. It's Whistler work. Recent, too." Jansen's voice crackled over the comms. "So, what? The Gaians found one of these tunnels and just used it to waltz right in?" "That's exactly what it looks like," Martel replied grimly. "The Whistlers dig and the Gaians take advantage. We've been worried about Whistlers in the depths and Gaians on the surface, but now they're overlapping." Kade clenched his fists, his mind racing. "Martel, get me a depth reading on that tunnel. How far does it go?" The drone's sensors pinged back a result. Martel's voice carried a note of disbelief. "It stretches at least 1 kilometer and connects to the main water network. From there, it's anyone's guess." "Perfect," Jill muttered bitterly, as if this place wasn't a big enough mess already. Kade stepped back from the edge, his gaze fixed on the tunnel. "We've been treating the Gaians and Whistlers like separate problems, but if this keeps up, we'll be fighting on 2 fronts, above and below." Jansen sighed heavily. "And here I thought we'd get to breathe after this mission." "No chance," Kade said, his tone hard. "This changes everything. We need to map these tunnels and figure out how deep this goes." The drone's feed suddenly flickered, the screen turning to static. Martel's hands flew over the controls. "I lost it." The drone's signal just... A low melodic whistle drifted up from the tunnel, faint but unmistakable. The team froze, the sound sending chills down their spines. "Whistlers," Kade said, his voice like steel. "We can't take them on without a resupply. Let's get out of here." The return trip to base was one of thoughtful silence.